Imagine an ordinary morning. You open your eyes. For a few brief seconds, your mind is still your own. Then you reach for your phone. Within minutes, everything changes. A headline makes you anxious. A comment irritates you. A stranger's success makes you question your own progress. Before the day has even begun, your attention has already been pulled in every direction. The unsettling part is that most people never notice this happening. They think they're thinking. But more often than not, they're reacting. Reacting to news. Reacting to opinions. Reacting to fear. Reacting to emotions they never consciously chose. Day after day, this becomes a habit. And eventually, many people begin asking themselves, why am I always exhausted? Why can't I focus? Why does it feel like I'm losing control of my life? The answer is usually not found in the world around them. It's found in a deeper question. Who is controlling their mind? More than 2,000 years ago, long before smartphones, social media, and algorithms competed for human attention, Marcus Aurelius fought the same battle, not against foreign enemies, but within himself. Surrounded by war, disease, and uncertainty, he reminded himself of a simple truth. The mind can become a fortress. Marcus understood something many people today have forgotten. The world rarely conquers a person through force. It conquers them through distraction. It doesn't need chains. It only needs your attention. Because whoever controls your attention will eventually influence your thoughts. Whoever influences your thoughts will influence your decisions. And whoever influences your decisions long enough will influence your destiny. This video is not about controlling the world. No one can do that. It is about reclaiming control over the place where every victory and every defeat begins. Your mind. In the next few minutes, we'll explore 10 Stoic rules that helped philosophers, leaders, and ordinary people remain calm in chaos, clear in confusion, and strong in a world constantly competing for their attention. Because before you can master your life, you must first learn to master the mind that is living it. There is a question most people never truly ask themselves. If everything external were taken away from me, what would remain? If the money disappeared, if the status disappeared, if the recognition disappeared, if circumstances suddenly turned against me, who would I still be? That is not a philosophical question. It is a question of strength. Because many people appear strong when life is going well. But the moment adversity arrives, they fall apart. A rejection, a failure, a betrayal, a loss. And suddenly, their peace disappears with it. What this reveals is a difficult truth. Many people do not actually own their peace of mind. They rent it from their circumstances. And when circumstances change, that peace leaves with them. The Stoics dedicated their lives to solving that problem. They did not try to build a life without hardship. They tried to build a mind that hardship could not destroy. Consider Epictetus. He was born a slave. He had no status, no power, very little control over his circumstances. Yet he became one of the freest minds in history because he discovered something most people never do. Many things can be taken from you, but one thing always remains: your response. No one can think for you. No one can choose your attitude for you. And no one can force your mind to surrender unless you hand it over yourself. Years later, Marcus Aurelius learned the same lesson from the opposite end of society. He ruled the most powerful empire on earth. Yet his life was filled with war, disease, loss, and uncertainty. He could command armies, but he could not command life. And that led him to a profound realization. You are not strong when everything goes your way. You are strong when nothing goes your way and you remain yourself. That is where a slave like Epictetus and an emperor like Marcus Aurelius meet. Their circumstances were completely different, but their battle was exactly the same. The battle for mastery over the mind. And it is the same battle we face today. Only the enemy has changed its form. Very few people are trying to chain your body, but countless things are trying to capture your attention. Very few people tell you what to think, but thousands of voices try to think for you every day. The Stoics understood that every conquest begins in the same place, the mind, and that is why they began by guarding it. Because whatever you repeatedly allow into your mind eventually becomes part of who you are. Rule number 1, guard the gates of your mind. Another morning, another ordinary day. A man wakes up at 6 o'clock. Nothing bad has happened. No one has threatened him. No one has threatened him. No disaster is waiting outside his door. And yet, within 20 minutes of waking up, his state of mind has completely changed. A headline makes him anxious. A post makes him angry. A photo makes him feel behind. An argument that has nothing to do with his life steals his attention. Before the day even begins, his mind is carrying burdens he never chose. If you asked most people what happened to him, they wouldn't know. Marcus Aurelius would. He would say that the man allowed strangers to enter his mind without ever checking who they were. That is exactly what millions of people do every day. They lock their doors, protect their money, safeguard their possessions, but they leave the gates of their minds wide open. Anyone can enter. Anything can enter. Fear, envy, resentment, negativity, meaningless opinions, pointless arguments, and then they wonder why their minds feel restless. Marcus Aurelius once wrote, "The soul becomes dyed with the color of its thoughts." Think about that for a moment. What you repeatedly consume does not simply affect your mood. It gradually shapes your character. If you spend hours feeding on outrage, you become easier to anger. If you spend hours comparing yourself to others, dissatisfaction becomes your default state. If you spend hours absorbing fear, you begin to see the world through fearful eyes. Not in a single day, not in a single week, but little by little, like a drop of ink falling into a glass of clear water. At first, the change is invisible. Eventually, the entire glass changes color. That is how the mind works. It absorbs what is repeated, then turns repetition into habit, habit into character, and character into destiny. That is why the Stoics were selective about what they allowed into their minds. Not because they feared the world, but because they understood the power of repeated exposure. Every day, the world competes for space inside your head. The news wants it. Algorithms want it. The crowd wants it. And most of them do not care what is best for you. They only want your attention. That is why one of the most important Stoic skills is not learning how to think. It is learning what deserves your thoughts. Not every opinion deserves your attention. Not every argument deserves your participation. Not every emotion deserves to be fed. A mature mind does not absorb everything. It selects. It filters. It decides. Imagine you are the gatekeeper of a fortress. Every day, thousands of visitors arrive at the gate. You would not allow all of them inside. You would ask, "Who are you? What do you bring? Will you strengthen this place or weaken it?" The Stoics asked the same questions of thoughts, and that made all the difference. Because your life is shaped not only by what happens to you, but by what you allow to remain inside your mind. Every conquest begins at the gate, and so does every form of freedom. But even after learning to protect your mind from outside influences, there is another invader that many people willingly welcome inside: the need for approval. Rule number 2, stop needing everyone's approval. Imagine a man standing at a crossroads. One path leads toward the life he truly wants. The other leads toward the life that will make everyone else happy. Deep down, he already knows which path belongs to him. Yet he chooses the other one. Not because it is better, not because it is wiser, but because he is afraid. Afraid of being judged, afraid of being rejected, afraid of being rejected. And so, once again, he trades freedom for approval. The sad part is that this happens every day. Not only in life's biggest decisions, but in hundreds of smaller ones. A person stays silent when they should speak. A person abandons a dream because it seems too risky. A person follows expectations instead of convictions, not because they lack ability, but because they have become dependent on external validation. Epictetus once said, "If you want to improve, be content to be thought foolish." At first, that sounds uncomfortable, but it is one of the most liberating ideas in Stoicism. Because the moment you need everyone to agree with you, you hand them power over your life. Think about it. If praise can make you feel valuable, criticism can make you feel worthless. If approval lifts you up, disapproval can tear you down. If your identity depends on applause, your peace depends on the crowd. And the crowd is one of the most unstable things on earth. Today it praises you. Tomorrow it forgets you. Today it supports you. Tomorrow it condemns you. The Stoics understood something many people spend their entire lives trying to avoid. You cannot live authentically and please everyone at the same time. Those two goals often move in opposite directions. Marcus Aurelius ruled the most powerful empire in the world, yet he was criticized, misunderstood, opposed. If even Marcus Aurelius could not gain universal approval, what makes us think we can? It is an impossible game, and millions of people spend their lives playing it. They constantly adjust themselves, constantly edit their personalities, constantly shape their choices around what others might think, until one day they realize they no longer know who they really are. That is the cost of living for approval. You do not lose your freedom all at once. You lose it gradually. Every time you stay silent when you should speak. Every time you agree when you should disagree. Every time you betray yourself to avoid discomfort. One compromise, then another, then another, until the life you are living no longer feels like your own. The Stoics considered this a form of slavery. Not slavery to chains, but slavery to opinion. And the strange thing is that most people trapped in this prison never realize they are inside it, because the bars are made of compliments, recognition, validation, approval. At first, those things feel wonderful, but once you become dependent on them, they become a cage. That is why the Stoics always return to one simple question. Am I living according to my principles? Not. Do people like me? Not. Do people agree with me? Only. Am I living rightly? Because self-respect will always be worth more than applause. A person who masters their mind does not hand their compass to the crowd. They can listen. They can learn. They can accept criticism. But they never allow others to decide who they are. That is freedom. That is strength. And that is what makes a person extraordinarily difficult to control. Yet even after escaping the need for approval, another enemy remains. One that lives inside you. One that can undo years of wisdom in a matter of seconds. Unchecked reactions. Rule number 3, master the pause. It takes only a few seconds to change the course of a life. A sentence spoken in anger. A message sent too quickly. A decision made in the heat of emotion. Most people imagine their biggest mistakes will come after long periods of thought. In reality, many of them happen in moments. Moments when emotion takes control and reason steps aside. Imagine a man sitting alone after a difficult day. He's tired, frustrated, already carrying more stress than he realizes. Then a message appears on his phone. A few words. Nothing more. Yet instantly, something changes. His heart rate rises. His jaw tightens. His mind begins preparing a response before he has even finished reading. He starts typing. Fast, defensive, angry. In that moment, he believes he is taking control. In reality, he has just surrendered it. Because whenever emotion grabs the wheel, wisdom becomes a passenger. The Stoics understood this deeply. That is why they treated one small skill as the foundation of self-mastery: the pause. Between what happens to you and how you respond, there is always a space. Sometimes it lasts only a few seconds, sometimes only a heartbeat, but it exists. Most people never notice it. The Stoics trained themselves to live inside it. Epictetus taught that people are disturbed not by events themselves, but by their judgments about those events. That idea sounds simple, until anger arrives, until pride is wounded, until fear takes over. Then philosophy becomes difficult. That is why Marcus Aurelius constantly reminded himself that no one could force him to react. Not an insult, not bad luck, not another person's behavior. Only Marcus could decide what Marcus would become. That principle remains just as powerful today, because it places responsibility exactly where it belongs, back in your hands. Imagine a spark landing on a wooden floor. By itself, it is harmless. Feed it with fuel, and it becomes a fire. Emotions work the same way. Anger begins as a spark. Fear begins as a spark. Resentment begins as a spark. But every time you replay the event, justify the feeling, or build a story around it, you add fuel. Eventually, the fire becomes large enough to control you. The Stoics chose a different approach. They noticed emotions without immediately obeying them. They observed anger without becoming anger, observed fear without surrendering to fear, observed insult without rushing toward retaliation. That small distance changes everything, because you are not every emotion that enters your mind. You are the person who decides what to do with it. One of the clearest signs of maturity is not feeling fewer emotions. It is being ruled by fewer of them. A strong mind still feels anger, still feels disappointment, still feels anxiety. But those emotions do not hold the steering wheel. They remain passengers, and that makes all the difference. The next time life provokes you, remember this: every reaction is a transfer of power, and every pause is an opportunity to take that power back. If you're still watching, comment the word pause. Not for me, but as a reminder that true strength is not reacting the fastest. It is choosing the wisest response. Yet even after learning to control your reactions, another enemy remains. An enemy disguised as comfort. Rule number 4, train yourself to be uncomfortable. Imagine two men walking into the same gym. The first looks for the easiest exercise he can find, the lightest weight, the least resistance, the most comfort. The second walks toward the weight that makes him hesitate, not because he enjoys pain, but because he understands something important. Muscles do not grow inside comfort. Neither does character. That is a lesson much of the modern world has forgotten. Today, almost every form of discomfort can be escaped instantly. Bored? Reach for your phone. Lonely? Open social media. Stressed? Find another distraction. Uncomfortable? Leave. Never in history has comfort been so accessible. Yet never have so many people become so fragile in the face of small discomforts. A delayed reply, a difficult conversation, a critical comment, a moment of boredom. Minor inconveniences that previous generations considered normal now feel unbearable to many people. The Stoics saw this danger long ago. Seneca, despite being one of the wealthiest men in Rome, regularly practiced voluntary discomfort. He wore simple clothing, ate modest meals, and occasionally lived with less than he needed. Not because he hated wealth, but because he feared dependence. He understood that the greatest danger was not poverty. It was becoming a prisoner of comfort. Seneca often asked himself, "Is this what I was so afraid of?" Because many fears shrink the moment we face them, but only when we face them, never when we avoid them. That is the difference. The weak seek comfort. The strong seek growth, and those two paths rarely lead to the same destination. Every time you choose the easier option, you teach your mind a lesson. You tell it, "I cannot handle difficulty." Every time you willingly face discomfort, you teach it something else. You tell it, "I am stronger than I thought." Those lessons accumulate, day after day, until they become identity. That is why some people emerge stronger from hardship while others become weaker. Not because life treated them differently, but because they responded differently. Marcus Aurelius wrote, "The impediment to action advances action. What stands in the way becomes the way." Most people see obstacles and ask, "How do I avoid this?" The Stoics asked, "What is this trying to teach me?" That single question changes everything, because a spoiled mind needs perfect conditions. A trained mind can function even when conditions are not, and life consistently rewards the second person. Challenges will come, loss will come, failure will come. The question is never whether hardship will arrive. The question is who you will become when it does. Will you break, or will you grow? The answer is being decided right now, in small choices, small acts of discipline, small encounters with discomfort. Because a mind that cannot handle small discomforts will struggle against large ones. But a mind trained through thousands of small difficulties becomes remarkably difficult to defeat. And once you learn to face discomfort, you begin to discover another truth. Many of life's greatest struggles do not come from reality itself. They come from the stories we tell ourselves about reality. Rule number 5, separate facts from stories. A woman sends you a message. You reply. An hour passes. No response. 2 hours pass. Still nothing. By the end of the day, your mood begins to change. Maybe she's upset with me. Maybe I said something wrong. Maybe she's losing interest. Maybe something is wrong between us. What makes this interesting is that every one of those conclusions could be false. Yet the mind often treats them as facts. That is one of the most dangerous habits we have. We do not simply experience reality. We create stories about reality. And much of our suffering comes not from what happened, but from the meaning we attach to what happened. Epictetus recognized this nearly 2,000 years ago. He wrote, "People are disturbed not by things, but by the views they take of them." Think about how often this happens. A message goes unanswered. That is a fact. She must be ignoring me. That is a story. A meeting gets canceled. That is a fact. My career is falling apart. That is a story. Someone offers criticism. That is a fact. I'm not good enough. That is a story. You experience a setback. That is a fact. I am a failure. That is a story. The problem is that the mind rarely separates the two. It wants explanations. It wants certainty. It wants a narrative, even if it has to invent one. Imagine walking through your house late at night. You notice a shadow in the corner. Immediately, your imagination begins working. Maybe someone is there. Maybe something is wrong. Maybe danger is nearby. Your body reacts before you know the truth. Then you turn on the light and discover it was only a chair. That is how many people live. Not in reality, but in interpretations of reality. And those interpretations are often far more frightening than the truth itself. Marcus Aurelius practiced a simple discipline. He stripped events down to their bare facts. He tried to see things exactly as they were, without exaggeration, without dramatization, without unnecessary meaning. If someone insulted him, it was a sound made by another human being. If a plan failed, it was simply a failed plan. If someone disliked him, it was merely another person's opinion. He refused to add a second layer of suffering on top of the first event. And that second layer is where most suffering lies. The Stoics understood something many people never realize. Facts are usually manageable. Stories are often unbearable. That is why whenever anxiety, anger, or sadness appears, it helps to ask a simple question. What is the fact? And what is the story? Sometimes that question changes everything, because reality is often far less dramatic than the movie playing inside your head. The mind loves turning clouds into storms, comments into attacks, obstacles into disasters, setbacks into identities. The Stoics refuse to participate in that movie. They return to reality, return to the facts, return to what actually existed, because you cannot see clearly through the fog of your own stories. And when that fog begins to disappear, you realize something surprising. Many of the things that caused you suffering were never truly there at all. Yet even after learning to separate facts from stories, there remains another treasure that is stolen from people every day. Not money, not possessions, not even time, but something far more valuable: your attention. Rule number 6. Protect your attention like gold. If a stranger knocked on your door and said, "I'd like to take 3 hours of your life every day," you would refuse immediately. If someone asked you to hand over a large part of your income every month for nothing in return, you would refuse that too. Yet millions of people do something very similar every day. The difference is that they do not realize it, because what is being taken from them is not money. It is attention. And attention may be the most valuable resource they possess. Money can be earned back. Attention cannot, because attention determines how you spend your time. And how you spend your time determines how you spend your life. One person may have 8 free hours every day, but if their attention is constantly scattered, those hours produce very little. Another person may have only 2 deeply focused hours, yet those 2 hours can completely change their future. Marcus Aurelius once wrote, "Concentrate every minute like a Roman." At first glance, it sounds like advice about productivity. It is something much deeper. It is advice about ownership. Because wherever your attention goes, your life follows. If your attention constantly feeds anger, you become angrier. If it constantly feeds fear, you become more fearful. If it constantly feeds distraction, you become more distracted. Attention is never neutral. It is always shaping you. The modern world understands this extremely well. That is why thousands of companies compete for your attention every day. Not your possessions, not your money, your attention. Because whoever owns your attention gains influence over your thoughts, and whoever influences your thoughts gains influence over your choices. At first, that influence seems small, a few minutes here, a few seconds there, but repeated over years, it becomes enormous. That is why one of the greatest battles of our age is being fought over attention. And most people are losing without realizing it. They wake up and immediately check their phones. They switch tasks every few minutes. They jump from one notification to another, from one screen to the next. Their attention becomes fragmented, divided, scattered. By the end of the day, they feel exhausted, not because they accomplished too much, but because their minds change direction too many times. Imagine sunlight. When it is scattered, it simply warms the ground. But when it is focused through a magnifying glass, it can start a fire. The mind works the same way. Scattered attention rarely creates anything extraordinary. Focused attention can change an entire life. That is why the Stoics treated concentration as a form of power. Not physical power, not political power, internal power. The ability to keep your mind where you choose to place it, instead of where the world wants it to go. That ability is becoming increasingly rare and increasingly valuable. The Stoics would never ask, "How much time do I have?" They would ask, "What am I giving my attention to?" Because that is the real question. At the end of your life, much of who you become will be determined by whatever repeatedly held your attention. A distracted mind is easy to control. A focused mind is difficult to conquer. And few investments will ever produce greater returns than learning to protect your attention. If you're still watching, comment the word focus. Not for me, but as a reminder that where you place your attention today shapes the person you become tomorrow. Yet even after reclaiming your attention, another trap remains. One that steals peace from countless people. Living in fears about a future that has not happened yet. Rule number 7. Stop borrowing trouble from tomorrow. It is 2 o'clock in the morning. A man lies awake in bed. His body is exhausted, but his mind refuses to rest. He is thinking about tomorrow. What if I fail? What if everything goes wrong? What if I make a mistake? What if they reject me? One scenario after another. One disaster after another. His mind has become a machine producing endless worst-case outcomes. The strange thing is that none of those things are actually happening. There is no meeting taking place, no rejection, no disaster, only thoughts. Yet his body reacts as if the danger were real. His heart races, his muscles tighten, his stress grows stronger. Because to the mind, an imagined threat can sometimes feel almost identical to a real one. Seneca recognized this centuries ago. He wrote, "We suffer more often in imagination than in reality." That may be one of the most accurate observations ever made about human nature. Many people are not defeated by what happens. They are defeated by what they think might happen. They suffer in advance, fear in advance, exhaust themselves in advance. And by the time reality arrives, they have already fought the battle 100 times inside their heads. Think about your own life. How many things kept you awake at night that never happened? How many fears consumed your attention only to disappear later? How many times did you suffer twice? Once in imagination, and then again only if the event actually occurred. This is one of the most expensive habits of the human mind. It spends energy fighting ghosts. Marcus Aurelius understood this deeply. His future was often far more uncertain than ours. Wars threatened the empire. Disease spread through cities. Political betrayals were common. Yet Marcus constantly brought himself back to the present moment because he understood something simple. You cannot act in tomorrow. You can only act today. You cannot solve next week's problems. You can only solve today's. You cannot live in the future. You can only live here, now. The Stoics did not ignore the future. They planned for it, prepared for it, considered risks. But they refused to live inside those risks. There is a profound difference between preparation and worry. Preparation creates strength. Worry consumes it. Preparation leads to action. Worry often leads to paralysis. Preparation focuses on solutions. Worry focuses on fear. The Stoics chose the first path. They looked at what could be done, did it, and released the rest. Because the future is always hidden behind fog. No one sees the entire road ahead. Not you, not me, not Marcus Aurelius, not anyone. Trying to live in the future is like trying to walk through dense fog while staring miles ahead. You exhaust yourself and still lose your footing. The Stoics chose another approach. They focused on the next step, then the next, then the next. And eventually they arrived where they needed to be. Not by controlling the future, but by mastering the present. Remember this, the future has never stolen your peace. Your thoughts about the future have. And the moment you return to the present, many of those fears lose their power. Yet even after escaping the trap of future anxiety, there remains another source of suffering. One that drains more energy than almost anything else. Trying to control what was never yours to control. Rule number 8, become indifferent to what you can't control. Imagine a man standing in the rain, furious at the sky. He curses the clouds, complains about the weather, wishes the storm would stop. Yet the rain continues to fall, unaffected by his frustration, unmoved by his anger. It sounds ridiculous, but many people spend their lives doing exactly the same thing. They fight the past. worry about the future, obsess over other people's behavior, and exhaust themselves trying to control outcomes that were never theirs to control. Then they wonder why they feel drained. Epictetus built his philosophy on one simple observation. Some things are within our control, and some things are not. A short sentence. Yet almost the entire Stoic philosophy can be traced back to it. Because much of human suffering begins when we confuse those two categories. You can control your effort, but not the outcome. You can control your actions, but not other people's reactions. You can control your character, but not the opinions of the crowd. You can plant seeds, but you cannot command the seasons. The Stoics understood this, and that understanding set them free. Marcus Aurelius woke up every morning knowing there were countless things beyond his control. He could not fully control the empire. He could not fully control war. He could not fully control disease. He could not fully control other people. But there was one thing he could control: himself. That is where he invested his energy. That is where he focused his attention. That is where he accepted responsibility. And that is why he remained steady in circumstances that would have broken many others. Imagine two sailors caught in the same storm. The first spends the journey screaming at the wind. The second adjusts his sails. The first fights the ocean. The second learns how to navigate it. One wastes energy. The other uses it. That is the difference. The Stoics were not stronger because they faced fewer difficulties. They were stronger because they refused to waste strength on unwinnable battles. This lesson is especially important today. Every day, countless things try to drag your attention toward problems you cannot control. The news, politics, social media outrage, other people's opinions, arguments between strangers. All of them invite you to react. All of them ask for your emotional energy, and many people willingly give it away. They spend hours angry about things they cannot change, while neglecting the things they can. Their health, their discipline, their knowledge, their work, their character. The Stoics always return to the same question: what is actually mine to control? If it belongs to you, act. If it does not belong to you, release it. Simple, but not easy. Because the ego wants control over everything. It wants reality to obey. It wants people to behave exactly as expected. It wants life to be fair. But reality does not negotiate. And the moment you truly accept that, a great deal of suffering disappears. Not because life becomes easier, but because you stop fighting battles that were impossible from the beginning. True freedom is not controlling everything. True freedom is knowing exactly what does not need to be controlled. Once you learn that, the mind becomes lighter, calmer, stronger, harder to manipulate, harder to disturb. Yet there is one final challenge. A challenge that causes many people to abandon their principles and surrender to the crowd. The fear of standing alone. Rule number 9, learn to stand alone. Imagine being the only person in the room who sees something clearly. Everyone else believes the same thing, repeats the same opinions, walks in the same direction, and deep down, you know they are wrong. What is harder? Seeing the truth, or standing by the truth when you stand alone? For most people, the second challenge is far more difficult, because one of humanity's deepest fears is not failure. It is rejection. The fear of criticism. The fear of being misunderstood. The fear of being isolated from the group. And that fear has caused countless people to betray themselves, not in dramatic moments, but in ordinary ones. They stay silent when they should speak, agree when they should disagree, follow when they should think. Little by little, they surrender their inner compass. Marcus Aurelius once wrote, "Be like the rock against which the waves continually break. The waves crash, the rock remains, That image captures something essential about Stoicism. Not stubbornness, not rebellion, but stability. The ability to remain rooted in your principles while everything around you changes. The crowd is always changing. Today it praises. Tomorrow it condemns. Today it celebrates one thing. Tomorrow it celebrates another. If your identity depends on the crowd, your life will constantly shift beneath your feet. You will never stand on solid ground. The Stoics built their lives on something stronger. Principles, reason, character, values that remain intact whether they are applauded or criticized. History offers countless examples. Many of the people we admire today were unpopular in their own time. Not because they were always right, but because they refused to let the crowd do their thinking for them. That is the real issue. The Stoics did not seek to be different. They simply refused to surrender their ability to think independently. And that quality is becoming increasingly rare. Today, pressure comes from every direction. Not only from family, not only from society, but from millions of screens, millions of opinions, millions of voices telling you what to believe, what to desire, and who to become. If you are not careful, you can spend your entire life following a script written by someone else, pursuing goals that are not truly yours, desiring things you never genuinely wanted, fearing things you never personally examined. That is why the Stoics viewed the ability to stand alone as a form of strength. Not because they disliked people, but because they understood that a mind dependent on the crowd is a mind easily controlled. A person who can sit alone with their thoughts becomes difficult to manipulate. They can listen without being carried away, learn without losing themselves, change their mind when evidence demands it, but never change simply because of pressure. The Stoics often return to questions like these. If nobody praised me for this, would I still do it? If nobody noticed, would I still do it? If nobody agreed, would I still believe it? Those questions reveal more about freedom than most people realize. Because freedom is not doing whatever you want. Freedom is remaining faithful to what you know is right, even when approval is absent. That is why the Stoics could stand among the crowd without becoming part of it. They kept their principles. They kept their direction. They kept their minds. In a world full of noise, that is a rare form of power. If you're still watching, comment the word independent. Not for me, but as a reminder that the moment you stop handing the steering wheel of your life to the crowd is the moment you begin reclaiming your freedom. And that brings us to the final rule, the rule that ties everything together. Because knowing these principles is not enough. You must learn how to live them. Rule number 10, practice daily mental sovereignty. Marcus Aurelius woke up every morning with the same challenge you and I face. Not war, not politics, not an empire, his own mind. Every day he confronted impatience, fatigue, disappointment, distraction, the same internal struggles every human being faces. That is why he wrote what would later become Meditations, not to teach the world, but to remind himself. Because Marcus understood something many people never fully grasp. No one masters the mind through philosophy alone. You master it through practice, daily practice, lifelong practice. That is the final rule, and perhaps the most important one, because every lesson we have discussed becomes meaningless without it. Guarding your mind, releasing the need for approval, mastering your reactions, welcoming discomfort, separating facts from stories, protecting your attention, living in the present, focusing on what you can control, standing alone when necessary. All of these are skills, and skills only exist when they are practiced. The Stoics treated each day like a training ground. Morning was preparation, evening was reflection. Before the day began, they asked themselves, what kind of person do I want to be today? More disciplined? More courageous? More patient? More calm? Not, how much money will I make? How much recognition will I receive? How many people will admire me? But who will I become? That is the difference between building a life from the outside and building one from within. And when the day ended, they returned to themselves, not to criticize, not to shame themselves, but to examine. How did I respond today? What stole my attention? What caused me to lose my composure? Where did I betray my principles? What can I do better tomorrow? That is how a strong mind is built, not through dramatic transformations, but through thousands of small corrections, day after day, year after year. Most people wait for a life-changing moment, a breakthrough, an opportunity, a book, a course. The Stoics did not. They understood that destiny is often built in ordinary moments, in how you respond to criticism, in how you use an hour of free time, in how you handle discomfort, in how you speak to yourself when no one is listening. Every small choice becomes a vote for the person you are becoming. That is why self-mastery is not a decision. It is a habit. And one day, if you remain committed to the practice, you begin to notice something remarkable. The world has not changed very much. People have not changed very much. Difficulties still exist. Distractions still exist. Chaos still exists. But you have changed. You no longer react to everything. You no longer chase every opinion. You no longer allow your attention to be pulled in every direction. You no longer allow circumstances to dictate your state of mind. That is what the Stoics called freedom. Not freedom from hardship, but freedom from being ruled by hardship. Not freedom from chaos, but freedom from being controlled by chaos. Not freedom from the world, but freedom from allowing the world to decide who you are. And that is a form of power no one can give you, and no one can take away from you. It must be built, thought by thought, choice by choice, action by action, day by day, because every true conquest begins within. By now, you may have realized something important. The greatest battle of your life was never really outside of you, not against other people, not against circumstances, not against the world, but within your own mind. Every day, countless forces compete for control of it. Fear, distraction, anger, comparison, other people's opinions. All of them want your attention. All of them want your energy. And many people hand those things away without ever noticing. The Stoics refused to do that. They understood that a person who masters their mind becomes extraordinarily difficult to control, difficult to manipulate, difficult to distract, difficult to defeat. Not because they are stronger than everyone else, but because they refuse to surrender their power to external forces. Marcus Aurelius ruled an empire. Yet the greatest lesson he left behind was not how to govern others. It was how to govern yourself. Because in the end, that is the hardest victory, and the most valuable one. You cannot control everything that happens, but you can control how you respond. You cannot control the world, but you can learn to control your mind. And when you do, you gain something very few people ever achieve: true freedom. Not freedom from difficulty, but freedom from being ruled by difficulty. Not freedom from chaos, but freedom from being controlled by chaos. Not freedom from the world, but freedom from allowing the world to decide who you are. Because ultimately, the person who masters their mind becomes a person the world struggles to conquer. And that is the power the Stoics have been passing down for more than 2,000 years. If you found value in this video, consider subscribing to the channel. Because mastering the mind is not a one-time achievement. It is a lifelong practice. And together, we will continue exploring the timeless wisdom of Stoicism to build lives that are calmer, stronger, and more intentional. Thank you for watching, and I'll see you in the next video.